Nigeria is blessed, hugely blessed with various resources, both human and natural resources. One of them is gas. So when a lot of people say, our economy should be better than this, it is expected and understandable because we have hundreds of trillions of cubic feet of gas still untapped. Now, that's one way we can shore up, for example, our forex. There are other ways. And this morning, yes, we've talked about the political angle, but there's an economic angle as well, which we cannot talk about in isolation. In fact, there's a political economy, you'll hear them say. And to have that conversation with us, we're joined by Dr. Muda Yusuf, who is the founder and CEO, Center for the Promotion of Private Enterprise at CPPE. Dr. Yusuf, thank you for joining us on Sunrise Daily this morning. Well, I'd quickly like to get your thoughts on the conversation we had earlier. It looks like, yes, you're involved with private enterprise and all of that, but there's a political enterprise as well, and it's looking very lucrative, just hearing the expression of interest and nomination forms for political parties. But I'd like to bring that to bear on our economy. All of that activity, spending, how does it impact our economy? Is this good or not?
Yeah, thank you very much. Well, it depends on the perspective from which we are looking at it. At first, all this process of heavy monetization of the political process has a major disadvantage of exclusion. In other words, when we are looking for competent leaders, people with integrity, people who have the expertise, intellectual capacity, and all of that. When there is this heavy monetization, it has a way of excluding a huge percentage of people who have the capacity to lead. Because it is very difficult, very, very difficult to see people who have this quantum of money and who also have the integrity and the competence to provide the leadership. So the monetization process in the political space is creating a major leadership problem within the context of our democracy. So that is one issue in terms of the impact of the quality of leadership that this monetization is causing. Now, when you now look at it at a micro level in terms of the spending that goes along with elections, of course, it has some impact in terms of those who benefit directly from the spending. For instance, INEC has a huge budget to conduct elections. They are going to spend on logistics. They are going to spend on printing of ballot papers, ballot boxes. They are going to recruit ad hoc staff and all of that. That will lead to some injection of liquidity in the system, which is not bad. So for those who are private sector players, you follow the money, you know where INEC is spending the money, you can position yourself to also supply some of those things. And we must emphasize that INEC should, as much as possible, domesticate all the spending. This is not the time to go and be importing things for purposes of election. Whatever we need to do, we need to spend the money locally so that the local investors, local citizens can benefit from it. Secondly, the political parties also spend money. Again, from a purely investment or private enterprise perspective, we have to look at where they are spending the money on. Some of them spend the whole money on publicity. So for the private sector players that are in the media space, this is possibly also their own season. They have to place adverts, they have to do jingles, they have to move around, they have to do road shows. That is spending. Then you also spend a whole lot on logistics. Somebody has to provide that. So from a purely private investment or enterprise angle, we can look at it from that. But overall, the heavy monetization of the process is not good for the quality of leadership that the democratic process produces for us. And we don't have the right kind of leadership. It will affect the kind of institutions you have. It will affect the quality of policies. It will affect the quality of appointments. And at the end, it will have a very serious effect on economic performance, because all of these things work together.
Okay.
If we get
Dr.
it
Yusuf,
wrong at the top, we will have this problem.
So let me pick up on the policies, the quality of policies which you talk about, because all of these things are actually interconnected, as you have said. And just recently, the World Bank disclosed that import restrictions and the non-flexible exchange rate management by the CBN is majorly responsible for the food inflation we're seeing. And, you know, for a lot of people, that's a reality for them, which is why when they hear 100 million, 40 million, they think about how that can impact on their lives directly. Hitherto, we had been told that the food inflation is also as a result of insecurity, rising cost of transportation, and all of that. So in terms of policies, especially because this affects everyone, you know, particularly, what can we do? Do you agree with the World Bank on the one hand on the ways to ensure that we at least lessen the burden on the average Nigerian?
Yes, I agree with the World Bank. Bad policies have done a whole lot of damage. It has inflicted a whole lot of problems on this economy. Now we are faced with about 3 major crises now. We are faced with the energy crisis. We have a foreign exchange crisis. We have an inflation crisis. These are the 3 major economic challenges that we are faced with. Of course, we have the insecurity, which also has an impact on the economy. And for all of these crises, there's domestic components of the crisis. I'm talking of domestic factors that have contributed to the crisis. There is also the global or external factors, which you can call exogenous factors, that have contributed to the crisis. Now, for the exogenous factors, which are external factors, like this Ukraine problem, like the global energy prices and all of that, you don't have much control over that. And that is affecting all economies across the world. But domestically, we have a lot of control over the kind of policies, the policy choices, and the policy responses to this crisis. One of your earlier speakers, the background intro that you played, talked about the effect of policy on investment in the energy sector. Our energy crisis is so bad because we have mismanaged our oil and gas sector from a policy point of view. We have discouraged investment. We have caused a lot of investors to exit the country. We have allowed many of them to relocate from onshore. Some of them have gone to deep offshore. Many of them have even left the country because of bad policies. It's only recently we are talking about PIA. For how long have we been a player in the oil and gas sector? For close to 60 years. But because of some selfish interests, because of issues of corruption, we have not adequately incentivized investment. I mean, how much private investment do we have, for instance, in the downstream? The downstream is in refining, it's in pipelines, it's in logistics, in that. How much of private investment? The whole thing is dominated by the government, by NNPC. And look at the price we are paying for it today, because there is no investment in that space. So it is policy problem that has discouraged investment in the oil and gas sector, in the upstream and in the downstream. And for a very long time, investors have been crying that we need to fix the policy environment in oil and gas. But for some reasons, some policymakers feel that when the private sector is advocating for good policies, they're advocating for it for selfish reasons. They feel that it's because we want profit and all of that. They forget that if we create the right environment for investors, if the economy is growing, everybody benefits. It helps social stability, it helps economic stability, it promotes self-reliance and all of that. So that is the kind of damage
Mr. Yusuf,
that bad policies has done to oil and gas. The same thing in our foreign exchange policy. The crisis we have in the foreign exchange space today is also partly as a result of bad policies.
Well, Mr. Yusuf, just before, you know, a number of issues always come up. I mean, when we talk about the economy, today we're talking about the price of gas and all of that, you know, but it would seem like the IMF and the World Bank that Kade mentioned earlier, which you have also spoken to, agree on the state of inflation. They agree on everything concerning inflation. But recently, the IMF kind of reviewed its growth trajectory for Nigeria. Are you as optimistic as the IMF about Nigeria's economic growth forecast to 3.4% in the middle of all the things that the private sector have to contend with?
Well, issues of GDP growth are important, but sometimes they are also not as critical. Generally and historically and empirically too, there's a strong correlation between Nigeria's GDP growth and oil price. Empirically, that has been the trend. When oil price is increasing, our GDP often increases. Yes, we have challenges with oil output. Yes, we have challenges with insecurity in the oil and gas, oil-producing areas, affecting investors and all of that. Nonetheless, given the trajectory of global oil price, it will positively impact on GDP growth. So to that extent, and that is the main driver and main determinant of the forecast that the IMF has put on the table. To that extent, we can say, yes, we are going to have that. But what is GDP if you are contending with all of these crises? Look at inflation. If there's any problem that
and on inflation,
are complaining about, come again?
Yeah, on that inflation, both institutions also seem to agree on the role of food prices in all of that. And we've been talking about this for quite a bit, Mr. Yusuf. So is there a silver lining anywhere that can bring down the cost of food, the high cost of food prices, producing it, and even transporting it, logistics of it and all of that, in a way that it will directly affect our inflation figures positively?
Well, these things are not quick fixes. They are not things you can deal with in the immediate or short term. Because when you look at issues of food, there's a whole lot of structural issues impeding food supply. We have first the level of technology that we adopt in our food production, which is still very primitive and very traditional. We have the structural issues of having to move from the farm gate to the market, which is about roads and the railway system. We have the issues of storage, which is also again about electricity. We have the issues of post-harvest losses. So we have all of these issues. And these issues have been with us for a very long time. Of course, we have seen the CBN throwing a whole lot of money into the agri space. But money is not everything. The CBN seems to be almost working alone, just putting money out there. There are some other complementary things that needs to happen for us to have the right kind of outcomes. So that is why, in spite of all these so-called intervention funds, we are still having very high inflation in terms of food. So there we have that issue.
Right.
Then on top of that, we have this insecurity problem. If you have insecurity problem, how the farmers, even the limited ones that they are producing, they cannot even go to the farms.
Well, and I think a lot of these...
What is the situation now? And what is the outlook for this insecurity problem? it's not looking so bright.
Well, Dr. Yusuf, as you've said, a lot of this has been placed at the feet of insecurity, and clearly we need a lot of work in that area. But we have to anchor at this point. It's been a pleasure speaking with you, as always. Dr. Muda Yusuf is the founder and CEO, Center for the Promotion of Private Enterprises, joining us virtually this morning. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.